In part 2, I want to cover more coincidences in the Watts case that are not as coincidental as one might think. The security cameras at the Lazy Dog that Chris and Kessinger went to did not record and only had live footage. The security cameras inside a McDonald's were working, but the outside cameras were not. Law enforcement never bothered to get the footage from any of the CCTV street cameras for any of the routes made by parties involved. There were also no cameras at Survey 319 because it was an older well and would eventually be plugged and abandoned. And Nate's security camera did not pick up Nicole Atkinson pulling into the driveway when she dropped off Shanann. Do you think it's a coincidence that all of the video footage in this case was either faulty, missing, or non-existent? Everything that could substantiate the whereabouts of the people involved conveniently didn't work, or law enforcement didn't bother to look at it. Is it just a coincidence and unfortunate that law enforcement was not able to recover Kessinger's deleted text messages because they didn't have the technology to perform physical extractions on iPhones? Any mobile forensics expert knows that the only way to recover deleted text messages is by doing a physical extraction. That's if you are using mobile forensic software and if all of the other easier, less invasive options failed, which they didn't even bother to do either. And surely they could have borrowed the mobile forensics device from another department or purchased one, considering 4 people were just allegedly murdered. But that's what they do in these orchestrated events. They make up some excuse and figure no one will notice. And even if people do notice, they don't care because they know there's nothing we can do about it. They only give the public enough information to push their narrative. That's why there are so many holes and unanswered questions in this case. It may seem as though they were being transparent by releasing all of this information to the public, but if that were true, people still wouldn't be trying to figure out the answers. Isn't it baffling how Chris was able to somehow fit the girls into an 8-inch hole when Cece was 9.5 inches at her widest point? The inside of the hatch also has a lip that would have made it even more difficult. If it seems unrealistic, it's probably because it is. Do you think it's a coincidence that the girls were submerged in oil for 3 days, which would make them unrecognizable? And is it a coincidence that the girls' caskets had to be sealed shut because the oil made them highly flammable? Even though the coroner states in the discovery that the oil was removed from the girls at Survey 319 and again before the autopsies were performed. It's just another trick they use so they don't have to show any actual evidence. They know that something like this would be impossible for anyone to vet and that most people will believe it, whether it seems logical or not. And if anyone dare to question this claim, others will quickly accuse them of being crazy for even thinking such a thing. Do you think it's a coincidence that all of Shanann's Thrive videos on social media were watched by millions of people? Lavelle and Thrive were mentioned by the mainstream media and throughout the case several times, and there were hardly any images or videos where someone wasn't wearing a Thrive patch. It was a huge and rather genius publicity stunt, and Lavelle didn't have to pay a penny. Do you think it's a coincidence that the discovery states that Shanann was not feeling well in Arizona and even confided to a few of her Thrive friends that her and Chris were having marital problems? This gave Nicole Atkinson a reason to be worried about her friend so quickly. Take all that out of the picture and all you have is a woman who probably doesn't feel well because she is pregnant and who also just got done traveling and needed some rest. However, being pregnant and tired isn't a legitimate reason to call in a welfare check. Usually someone has to have a pretty strong feeling that someone is in serious danger or the person's life is at risk for law enforcement to even consider doing the welfare check. It's unusual that law enforcement would show up at the Watts house when they knew that it had only been a few hours from the time Nicole Atkinson dropped off Shanann. Do you think it's a coincidence that the Watts just happened to move across the country to live in Will County, which holds 90% of the oil in Colorado, and Chris just happened to murder his entire family around the same time that the oil company he worked for was at risk of losing millions of dollars if a bill called Proposition 112 passed? Do you think it's a coincidence that Chris's hearing was moved to Election Day, the same day that voters would decide whether or not the fracking buffer zones would be moved back from 500 feet to 2,500 feet? If 112 passed, it would have taken away about 80% of Colorado's resources from the oil and gas industries. These events are planned years in advance, and the people who are controlling the narrative are highly intelligent, master manipulators that know exactly what they are doing. There's an overwhelming amount of inconsistencies and holes in this case, but the lies and corruption run much deeper in this real-life American horror story.